Here in the UK, if you want to watch traditional or satellite channels, you have to pay for something called a TV license. And if you don't pay for it, people will literally come to your door to check if you're watching TV legally.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Sorry to bother you.
Hello, sorry, you work for the TV licensing.
This licence funds the BBC and all of its extensions as a public service. As the modern world has taken centre stage, the organisation has seen mounting criticism from multiple angles. Declining content quality, institutional failings with scandals, mismanagement of its flagship properties, and the outdated and unpopular TV licence fee. Many argue that it no longer serves the public interest in a way it once did, resulting in 500,000 people every year refusing to pay for a licence, and seeing a movement of people calling for the BBC to be defunded. The British Broadcasting Company Ltd was formed on October 18, 1922 by a group of leading wireless manufacturers, including the inventor of the radio, Guglielmo Marconi. Its creation was prompted by the need to provide structure and reliable broadcasting services across Britain. Prior to this, radio transmissions were sporadic and uncoordinated, with multiple companies vying for dominance in a new and unregulated space. The company was granted a license fee by the General Post Office, which oversaw telecommunications at the time. It was agreed that a single organisation should be responsible for radio broadcasting to avoid chaos on the airwaves and to ensure the content was in the public's interest. The BBC first general manager, John Reith, was a key figure in shaping this ethos. He believed that broadcasting should be educational, informative and entertaining. In 1927, the BBC was transformed from a private company into a public corporation by royal charter, which essentially meant that it could be independent from both governments and advertisers and focus on serving the public, not profit. The BBC was funded by a licence fee paid by households with radios, which is still pretty much the same thing we have today. During the 1930s and 40s, the BBC expanded its reach, providing radio broadcasts throughout the UK, and later launching the world's first regular television service in 1936. The corporation played a crucial role during World War II, keeping the public informed of accurate news, countering enemy propaganda, and boosting morale with entertainment programmes. Post-war, the BBC continued to grow. Television became a dominant medium, and the BBC maintained a reputation for quality journalism, drama and educational content. But by the 1950s and 60s, it had become a staple in British life. However, this also meant they had a monopoly on things like legal radio broadcasting in the UK, which of course led to pirate radio, because the BBC was too conservative and didn't reflect the vibrant new music scenes like rock and roll, and was ultimately too slow to adapt to modern pop culture. This resulted in the BBC creating Radio 1 in 1967, a pop music station that even hired DJs from pirate radios to attract younger audiences, which ultimately modernised the BBC's image. It was also during this time period that many high-profile presenters and entertainers began working with the BBC. Beloved people like David Attenborough and Bruce Forsyth became part of the furniture. However, unfortunately, so did a number of other people. One of the first DJs on Radio 1 when it launched was Jimmy Saville, who would later become one of Britain's most infamous criminals in plain sight. He also became the host of Top of the Pops and later Jim Will Fix It, both hugely popular BBC shows. His rise coincided with the BBC's growing reach and prestige, making him a household name with a lot of unchecked influence. At the time, the BBC lacked the internal oversight mechanisms that might have detected or prevented abuse by high-profile figures. This absence of scrutiny would later be one of the main criticisms during the investigation into Saville's behaviour after his death in 2011. The BBC's creation was rooted in a desire to serve the public with integrity and independence. However, by the time figures like Saville became prominent, the organisation's unchecked trust in its stars would contribute to its failure to protect its vulnerable individuals, something the BBC claims has since worked on to confront and correct. Except, it hasn't. The BBC has continuously failed with their staff, and worse still, have been accused of suppressing investigations into Saville's crimes to protect their reputation. More recently, former news presenter Hugh Edwards, who famously reported on the Queen's death, was found guilty of 3 counts of making indecent images of children, but was given a suspended sentence. Hugh was suspended by the BBC in July 2023, but it was later revealed that the BBC had continued paying him £200,000 after his arrest in November 2023. The BBC has apparently requested a return of these funds, but essentially, us mugs who pay for the TV licence were essentially paying for these people to commit crimes. But the most ironic thing about all of this is that the BBC are the ones who report on their fuck-ups, but the BBC's inability to hold its staff accountable isn't the only way it's lost the public's trust. It's the sheer cost. The TV license fee is currently set at £169 per year, set to increase to £174.50 in April 2025, which is mandatory for anyone who watches live TV in the UK, regardless whether they consume BBC content. This compulsory charge is increasingly difficult to justify in an era where viewers have access to a vast array of subscription services and free content online. Not only that, the system also disproportionately affects lower income households, with the number one crime being committed by single mothers being not paying the TV license. In 2019, 114,000 people were convicted for failure to pay. The offence comes with a fine of up to £1,000, which is particularly retarded when you consider that many of these people probably dodging the charge was because they couldn't pay in the first place. The BBC received £3.7 billion from the licence fee in the last financial year, about 2/3 of its total income. So if you're like 23.9 million other people, what do you actually get for your money? Although other streamers have their own problems going on with the content they produce, they have endless pits of money that allow them to throw as much shit at the wall to see what sticks. With shrinking resources, the BBC are actually being completely priced out of the high-end TV market, having to shelve premium TV projects due to a lack of funds and significant cost increases due to inflation, and having to deal with a 2-year freeze on the license fee between 2022 and 2024. You see, in 2012, Netflix began a streaming war which saw the industry become flooded with investment in a bid to build a content arsenal of expensive shows to build global reach, which dramatically inflated production costs of high-end shows. However, amongst building their own IPs, they also struck up deals with the BBC and Channel 4 to take already successful shows like Peaky Blinders and Black Mirror to a global audience. But not wanting to repeat history like pirate radio, the BBC was actually an early adopter of streaming, creating the BBC iPlayer in 2007, which has always worked pretty flawlessly, and has actually helped to make it quite nimble in the streaming era, adapting to modern viewing habits while also displaying their vast library of content from over the decades. But to put it bluntly, the BBC just simply can't compete with any other streaming providers in terms of quality, because their budgets are shrinking and shrinking. But in an industry that is currently going through major change in itself, which is exacerbated through the ever-changing political landscape, they haven't helped themselves in the slightest. They assisted themselves in suicide by killing some of their biggest IPs. Top Gear was once the BBC's crown jewel, attracting millions of viewers worldwide and generating significant revenue through international sales and merchandise. The show's success was largely due to its charismatic trio of presenters, who turned it into a global phenomenon. However, after Clarkson's departure in 2015 following an altercation with the producer, the BBC struggled to keep the show relevant. Subsequent iterations with new hosts failed to capture the same magic, and viewership plummeted. The recent cancellation of their latest version of Top Gear after Freddie Flintoff's near-death crash is a testament to the BBC's failure to preserve one of its most successful brands. If you want to find out how exactly this happened, you can watch both of these videos that I made that go into the downfall of Top Gear pre and post Clarkson. Doctor Who is another example of the BBC's mishandling of beloved franchises. The long-running sci-fi show, which first aired in 1963, enjoyed a major revival in 2005. However, in recent years, the show has seen an endless conveyor belt of poor writing, overt political messaging, and unpopular casting choices. Ratings have nosedived, and many long-term fans have abandoned the series completely. Without being a Brexit gammon, diversity, equity, and inclusion has infected the corporation to its own demise. Of course, everyone should have an opportunity to be involved in the industry, but completely biased political agendas alienate its original audience. When asked about woke criticisms, the co-star along the new Doctor stated, "There's been a couple of Doctor woke references or whatever, but I just think we're doing the right thing if we're getting comments like that. People are tired of every single movie, TV show, and game becoming political or having subliminal messaging. From its panel shows which flood the channels because they're cheap and easy to make, while also preaching to you what you should be thinking about on the current news cycle." The only thing the BBC has going for it is its cultural tentpoles that they acquired through decades of being one of the few channels to choose from. Things like BBC News, radio, and iconic British events like the death of the royal family are one of the few things that people cling to that are worth having the BBC for. Although once a nice idea, the idea of having to pay to watch TV and not even having a say in what's being programmed to you is crazy. And what's even worse, they serve you up a steaming pile of shit and expect you to be happy about it. And the most jarring thing is, there are so many NPCs out there who don't have a Scooby-Doo how bad it's gotten. As long as you keep their cultural tentpoles like Match of the Day, Songs of Praise, and anything with David Attenborough, they don't give a shit. The content reflects life in the UK. It's a perfect representation of a larger problem in the country. Stagnant, no ambition, try not to bash into the walls too much, and just keep our blindfold on and do what we've always done. Get on with it. Throughout history, we have been a behemoth in producing culture through artistic endeavours, a lot of which has come through the lens of the BBC. But through years of mismanagement, they've lost trust and just don't make cool shit anymore. Imagine if all of this publicly funded money was actually able to get in the hands of the vast amount of creative individuals we have in this country, and not just people who are there to pick up an inflated salary or check diversity checkboxes. The BBC's current Royal Charter, that was signed in 2017, guarantees its existence until at least the 31st of December 2027, after which the government will review its funding and purpose. The truth is, the BBC does provide some value, but how much value for the cost is a serious conversation that needs to be had. The government's current Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has begun negotiations with the corporation and how it will be funded going forward, and hasn't ruled out a subscription service model for the BBC, and is exploring a whole wide range of other possible options, stating, "There is no question in my mind that the licence fee is not only insufficient, it's raising insufficient money to support the BBC, but it is also deeply regressive. Ultimately, the BBC must adapt or risk becoming obsolete. Defunding the organisation and moving towards a more market-driven approach would not only be fairer for consumers, but also encourage the BBC to improve its content and accountability." Thank you so much for watching this video, it really does mean a lot to me. Make sure to follow me on all of my socials at Phat Network, like, subscribe, and comment below what you want to see next.